those of you who are with organizations that travel to be here with our students today. It really means a lot to us. Obviously, to the team from ATJ, we are grateful to you for choosing this as the final stop in your tour and making this happen. It really does mean a lot to our institution to have you lift up our school and our students this way. Thank you. So this is the final panel, and we are glad we had a chance to do something that our evening students could participate in. I want to thank the Barristers Society for hosting the panel, but they are really a collection of trial lawyers, lawyers who do criminal defense work, civil rights work, personal injury, plaintiffs work. They are lawyers that represent people that don't have access to justice in courtrooms across the Atlanta metro area. And what is so important about our partnership with the Barristers Society, and I think what today really lifts up, is that there's a recognition that the work that public defenders are doing every day in courtrooms is intimately connected to the work that civil rights lawyers and plaintiffs lawyers and lawyers doing work to give people access to justice on the civil side do. Those things are connected. And so when Sam Starks, the founder of the Barrister Society, Torres Butterfield, one of the founders, when they bring programming here to work with our students, to me it's all part of what we did here today. It's all part of helping our students connect to people who can help you pave pathways to careers that are meaningful, where you can employ the skills and the tools that you learn here at John Marshall to actually help people access justice and make a more equitable society. So I'm grateful to the Barrister Society, not only for your sponsorship today, but for your partnership throughout the years here at John Marshall. So I'm going to call up our panelists. We have an amazing panel. I'm going to call them up. I'll tell you a little bit about the panel, and then I'm going to let them do some of the talking, because I'm exhausted. So I want to call up Sam Starks, senior attorney with the Cochran firm here in Atlanta. Natasha Purdue Silas. Natasha is a senior litigation attorney with the federal defender here in town, also co-dean of the National Criminal Defense College, one of the leading organizations training criminal defense lawyers across the country. Tiffany Roberts, public policy director with the Southern Center for Human Rights. Sara Becker, who is with Sara Stewart Law, also legislative chair for the Georgia Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. And last but not least, someone I've watched grow in this profession, Zanele, the executive director of Gideon's. And the reason I wanted to put this panel together is because what everyone on this panel shares in common is they have all spent significant time serving as public defenders. I think you will see that that experience has shaped the work they've done beyond their experience as public defenders. Natasha remains a public defender, but also is now doing a lot of training for lawyers. But we have, these panelists now are doing work in spaces beyond the courtroom, and I really wanted to have this panel so our students could appreciate the connection between the work that lawyers are doing outside the courtroom and what we've been talking about today. So you can see that you may decide being a public defender isn't what you want to do, but there are many other things you can do that really is part of the effort of achieving justice. And so that's really why I wanted to put this panel together. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to start by asking each of our panelists to tell us a little bit about their experience as a public defender, what it is you do now, and how your current work is shaped by your experience as a public defender. And I'm going to start, Natasha, with you, since you're the furthest from me. So I'm gonna force some volume right off the bat. Natasha.
Okay. have enough money to hire a private lawyer who are accused of federal criminal offenses. And that can be any type of sort of offense you can think of. Many more things can be brought federal than people think. That can be drug offenses, tax offenses, firearm offenses, all kinds of different things that you can think of. It is scary. It is difficult work, but it's extremely rewarding to take on the government that has so many resources and to fight for the person standing next to you. So it's a great honor for me to be in the courtroom representing people. And that also inspired my work with the National Criminal Defense College, training other lawyers. We get applications from people who say that they are scared to take the case to trial, even though they know they need to. And that fear is what we try to equip them with, the preparation to have the courage to do this important work.
Awesome. And then let me just ask you, Natasha, your work with NCDC, the National Criminal Defense College, is that a mix of public defenders and private lawyers, more one or the other?
We train public, private, federal, and also military defense counsel, but only defense counsel.
And so if any of these folks are doing any defense work, they can reach out to you if they need some training.
Any defense work, not prosecutors, but we will defend you. We will train you if you are defending.
Great. Thank you. Tiffany, to you.
All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Tiffany Roberts. I'm the Policy Director at the Southern Center for Human Rights. Gideon's Promise, our Southern Public Defender Training Center.
Yes.
Class of 2009. Former trial partner Zanele, Ngubeni. I only practiced public defense for 2.5 years, in part because I was an organizer the entire time I practiced public defense. And it was very difficult to strike a balance doing advocacy in Fulton County in Atlanta and practicing at the PD's office. And so I went into private practice, and a good share of my practice was pro bono, low bono, mass defense, that sort of thing. I think that being a public defender, I went to law school to become a career public defender, right? So I really strayed significantly from my career path. But what I learned is that the organizing advocacy was the thing that I was most fond of, most tethered to, and probably the most skilled at. And what being a public defender enabled me to do was to build relationships with people that I really consider to be my family, my support system. Through doing Gideon's Promise, I was always reminded every 6 months of who to center in our work. And I think the people that are centered in our work, in my work, hasn't changed. At Southern Center, we're a nonprofit law firm. Our mission is to decriminalize race and poverty. And we do that through capital litigation, which includes trial litigation, post-conviction, and then we also just do some criminal defense and resentencing work, impact litigation, where we sue the government when people's constitutional rights are violated. And then the policy unit, we do hyperlocal, which is kind of like neighborhood-based, local, statewide, Southeast regional work, along with some federal policy work and now international advocacy, advancing the rights of people who are disproportionately impacted by criminal legal systems across the diaspora. Is that it?
That's great.
Okay.
That's great. Thank you. Appreciate that. Sam.
Good evening. I'm Sam Starks. Professor Rapping and I go back about 30 years. We were public defenders together in DC. I've been in Atlanta now for, I guess, about 20 years or so. I am primarily a civil rights attorney with the Cochran firm here in Atlanta. And my work, I guess, fortunately or unfortunately, sort of comes on the back end of the criminal justice system. By the time I get involved representing an individual or the family of someone that's been the victim of police misconduct, to some extent, much of the harm has been done. The cases that I handle as a civil rights lawyer, many of them involve wrongful death. And for those that don't involve wrongful death, they may involve a malicious prosecution claim where someone has, been through the system, gone to trial, and been acquitted. So for me, the connection of civil rights work with having been a public defender, it's a very direct and strong connection. But for having been a public defender, I would not be a civil rights lawyer. I think my skills, the skills that I bring to being a civil rights lawyer, by and large come from the work I did as a public defender. I tell criminal defense lawyers and public defenders all the time, I think any of these folks up here with me could step into my shoes and be a civil rights lawyer and do it effectively, because it's just the flip side. I mean, essentially, it all centers around the Fourth Amendment. So for me, the continuity of wanting to sort of stay involved in sort of doing good work sort of led me to civil rights work. So the only other sort of cases that I handle are sort of personal injury or medical malpractice cases, but primarily my work is devoted to people who have been abused, beaten, killed by the police.
Great, thank you, Sam. Zanele, so you're currently the executive director of Gideon's Promise. Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Oh, wow. So I'll tell you, I started as a public defender in New Orleans, and really it was at a critical time in New Orleans because it was in 2007, which was the first year it instituted its first statewide indigent defender system. So we went down, I was one of 16 lawyers from 2 states who I was one of 10 lawyers in New Orleans who went to New Orleans to help contribute to building that statewide indigent defender system. And it was frankly, at a time when they had historically had contract-based representation and were not keen on the idea of having non-local, non-contract defense attorneys come and engage in the representation. But it was powerful because when we went down, our priority wasn't maintaining relationships with the judges who were handing out the contracts. Our priority was just to do the work, was just to represent the clients who were, sitting in custody quite consistently for 30, 60 days or more at a time without seeing an attorney, without having cases that had been indicted. And so we went into a very hostile environment, and it was the 10 of us that at the time were all members of Gideon's Promise, started in the first 2007 class, that had each other. And it was our community that allowed us to sustain. And so that's how I started my practice as a public defender in a criminal courthouse with 16 different judges who had 16 different egos and preferences and all the rules that align with that. And, it will make you learn quickly how to do the work and center the client, because what you cannot center is all of those different people and all of the egos and personalities they bring into the courtroom with them. So I did that for a couple of years, and then I came back to Fulton County, and there I was at home. And I was in Fulton County for about 12 years in the public defender's office there. And it's a very, very different system. It was an established system. It was a relatively well-resourced system, which was the exact opposite of what New Orleans was. And it was wonderful because I could practice on some level the way that I wanted to. But what was difficult was that it was a large office, and it didn't have the same kind of community of zealous advocates that we had been forced to create when we were the ones in the system that nobody wanted to be there. And so because of that, it meant that I stayed connected to the community of public defenders that I now work with so that I can continue to be motivated and do the work. And in that work, I ran the gamut of types of cases and experiences. So everything from, misdemeanors and property crimes and simple possession crimes to, by the time I left, my entire docket was a homicide docket. So that was the work there. I also spent some time in Maryland doing DEI work, or diversity, equity, and inclusion work, with their statewide indigent defender system, because that's one of the oldest statewide systems, one of the largest statewide systems, and they are one of the systems who has adopted the Gideon's Promise curriculum, which really is a curriculum that centers the client, as Tiffany was talking about, and marrying the importance of understanding the client, but also the communities that they serve, and being able to go in and do holistic criminal defense advocacy. And so I spent some time in Maryland doing public work with that public defender, and then I came back to Georgia, worked with the public defender office here, helped establish one of the the first misdemeanor contract they had with Fulton County, to represent clients charged with misdemeanors, because up until that point, it was an all-felony courthouse. And then I eventually transitioned to really what was home, or kind of coming back to home, where I then went to serve as the training director for Gideon's Promise, and now the executive director. So how that aligns, how all of that aligns with what I'm doing now, is that every day I get to wake up and I get to foster and give into a community whose mission is to build public defender advocates who are prioritizing criminal justice reform and wanting to provide holistic client-centered representation and equal justice for people who come from marginalized communities. And the beauty of that is what we teach is you go into these systems, regardless of who the people are that you have to go up against, and you give the client that's sitting next to you every single bit of representation that they deserve. And so Gideon's Promise now does that for more than half the states. We started at 16 lawyers in 2 states, and we're now in over 30 states, and we've had thousands, at least 1,000 or more defenders come through the community. But that's only important because that means that we have really supported one another staying in the fight. And for everyone who stays in the fight, that increases the number of clients who are getting representation and the kind of representation they serve. So that's what I do, what I've done, and how it's shaped where we are now as where I am now at the organization.
Great, thank you. And Sara, you started your career as a public defender in Douglas County.
I did.
Now in private practice, also doing legislative work. I am curious about how you made the decision to go to private practice, how your being a public defender influences how you do that work, and then also, how does your being a public defender impact the work you do in the Statehouse?
Okay, great. Well, I can say without a doubt that the only reason that I am an attorney right now is because I was a public defender. I came out of law school and took a job in a corporate firm doing commercial finance, and within 6 months was like, what did I do? Why did I waste all this time and money on law school? I'm miserable. I should probably go do medical sales or something. This was a mistake. Found my way through a dear friend who knew from the get-go she wanted to be a public defender, and she is still a high-impact defender in the Atlanta community, because she said, you know what, don't quit yet. Why don't you go try the public defender's office in Douglas County? I went out there. They've got offices with doors that close. That's not the norm in public defender's offices back in 2004. Give it a shot. And I went there, and I learned that for me to be happy in my work, it has to be meaningful, and that it has to be justice driven. And I think that has continued to influence my private practice, my work through GACTL at the legislature. I found my way to it through the practicalities of life, I think, out of the public defender's office. I loved every minute of being out there, and I think that if the practicalities of life would have allowed, I probably would have stayed there. But I got pregnant and I was having a baby. I had an attorney husband, and frankly, my salary at that time in the public defender's office in Douglas County with no family in town did not support the type of childcare that we would need to allow both of us to do our jobs. So I took a break. And during that break, I found my way to the Georgia Innocence Project. I found myself, frankly, sometimes just like texting friends, "What's going on? Is there court? Can I get a babysitter and come watch court for a little bit?" So I knew I had to get back to it. And when the practicalities of life realigned and allowed me the opportunity, I took a job at a private firm here in Atlanta that practiced strictly criminal defense, and I love that as well. How I went from that to going out on my own involved another foray into civil work. I thought maybe this time, I'm tired of this commute up to Buckhead. I still don't think I'm getting paid enough money by these attorneys who are, have more experience than me. So let me just see if I like civil litigation. And long story short, I didn't. Maybe I didn't do the right type. I might have, but I will tell you that, litigating business contracts did not fulfill me or my justice-seeking kind of leanings. So I found my way back to private practice, decided this time I'm getting kind of old and I don't really like people telling me what to do. I think I'm just going to do it on my own. And so I started my own firm. And then funny enough, the same, as life, I think, gives us things sometimes, the same attorney that pushed me to criminal defense came to me and said, "Hey, I know you're passionate about these things. Let's work together." She had taken the leadership role at Gacdell. She said, "I want you to be my legislative chair. I think there's a lot of really good work and really good advocacy that we can do together." And that's where I am. Using my public defender background at the legislature, I think, is the resilience I learned, the ability to power through when it's exhausting, and to remember the meaning in the work that I do. I will tell you, and this is my first session in this role, I'm surviving. I think I'm thriving. But direct experiences, I have so much on-the-ground experience that I can talk to the legislatures about in the courtroom, but also kind of look at the bills and advocate from a perspective of seeing the bigger picture, knowing how some of the little tweaks that we might ask for, because we can't get them to defeat everything. A lot of times it's just about trying to work to make it better, or deciding, hey, that's really messed up. We're going to let y'all pass that because we're going to be able to fight the heck out of it on the other side, right? Just keeping an eye on, okay, can we tweak this in a way? Can we point something out? You want to triple that fine? Do you really need to triple it? Here's how it's impacting the people who get, even if it's just on traffic stuff. Here's the real life impact that this $50 fine is already having on the people it's hitting. And I have been surprised at how effective that those experiences have been able to be with people who are kind of on that big gold dome pedestal sometimes. So I think I hopefully answered it.
No, that's great. Thank you. So I think I know those of you on this panel have been engaged in the fight for economic justice and racial justice for years. I think as a nation, I think the George Floyd killing awakened a lot of people to some of the violence that happens in the streets. And there has been sort of a racial reckoning that's happened over the last few years. I want to start with you, Tiffany, and ask this question. In what ways are public defenders part of this broader fight for racial and economic justice? Because I think sometimes we see public defenders as very narrowly working in a courtroom, litigating individual cases. How do we see public defenders as part of this broader struggle that the nation is now grappling with?
I think the most effective public defenders are those who understand what it means for their clients to be a whole human being, right? And that means everything that they bring with them when they enter their offices, when they enter their communities, when they enter courtrooms. it is impossible to really center a client that you don't endeavor to understand. It doesn't mean that you, for example, if you don't have a background that has subjected you to racialized violence or gender-based violence, maybe, or the violence of poverty, then you may say that, you know, you can't fully appreciate your client's circumstance because you've never been through it. But in the same way that public defenders or defense attorneys, you know, you want to understand your client's story. You want to understand how to tell your client's story in a way that lends itself to your client being granted some relief in a criminal context or a civil context, really. In that same way that you try to understand the facts of the case. We should always be working to have conversations with our clients about the experiences that led them to the place where they are. And that doesn't always mean the place of culpability, right? It doesn't mean a place of accountability, right? But it does mean, what is it like for you when your mother sends you to the store? So these are things that we come to understand about our clients, that they often live in communities that are so heavily policed that even when they're just running an errand, it's not necessarily life or death because of gun violence in their communities. That's not the only thing. Sometimes they can't walk to the store without being approached, searched, and seized by police. Well, all of these kinds of things are at the center of the conversations that we keep having on repeat. And let's say 2020 was the last flashpoint of those conversations. Public defenders have always, in my experience, so the first organization that I co-founded was with other Gideon's Promise lawyers, Anna Carrion, Jessica Stern. We started an organization because we saw Atlanta police targeting Black boys after a killing happened in Grant Park. And we worked with social workers, educators, community members to stand up an organization that could fight for subpoena power for the Civilian Review Board and some other things. It allowed us to do more than just be effective litigators. And we won motions, people won trials, but it allowed us to do more, to operate outside of the confines of the law, because the law was not necessarily created to protect our clients. We just do the best that we can with it. So I think that what Gideon's Promise in particular teaches, the ethics that our organizations embrace is meeting clients where they are, not in a, some people say this to sort of signal some condescension, right? That you go down to the level where people are. And that's not what I'm saying, right? It's meeting your clients eye to eye, understanding their experiences, and where possible, partnering with organizations, initiatives, and individuals who have the community's best interests at heart. And I think a lot of public defenders, whether you're a part of an organization or not, you have the capacity to be an ally to movement, and that will long-term, on a protracted basis, benefit the communities that your clients come from.
And say, absolutely.
I was just, really, the question is, how are public defenders, right, part of this larger racial and economic justice fight? So from an economic perspective, all our clients are poor. I know that, right? So we've been in that fight since, Gideon versus Wainwright, since the case started. We know that. And as it happens, majority, a good significant portion of our clients are people of color. So we've been in that fight for a while too. And I think what Tiffany is talking about is really understanding the clients and the community that they're coming from. But for me, as a practitioner, where I saw the biggest awakening was after, of course, the protests and the conversations during the George Floyd case. And it wasn't that there wasn't an enlightenment that this was happening, because public defenders have been addressing these issues since day one. It was really that for the first time in my practice, right? At that point, we 12, 14 years in? For the first time in my practice, when I go into a courtroom and I say to a juror that you should question what you hear from the witness stand and judge that person as a human being and not just by the badge on their shoulder, they would actually pause and question it. Because George Floyd and all the incidents that come after that involve cell phones and body cam footage, and people have now an expectation that those stories are incorporated. They believe that there's more to the story in a way that they never would listen to before. And so I could go into a courtroom and say, you know what, sometimes cops lie. And people would say, okay, maybe they do, tell me more. Whereas before, they would just turn their ears off and stop listening. So that is a lesson for us that really, as public defenders, we want more of the community coming into courtrooms. We talk to judges and prosecutors every day, police officers every day. What we need is for the community to show up to see what's happening, and not just when they're impacted. Because if you can come up and see what's happening, you can tell the stories of the invisible violence that's happening on a day-to-day basis. And your voice may, in some circles, carry far more credibility than ours will, because we're the ones telling those elected officials those stories every day, but we're not the ones that's holding them accountable when it comes down to the ballot boxes and the funding resources and the funding streams. And so that was an opportunity for us to not just be in the fight, but to expand the fight to the communities. And like part of what Tiffany is talking about is us as litigators working with those communities to involve the communities for the people that are impacted to come into the court. We also need the people who don't believe that they're impacted to come into the court, because whether you acknowledge it or not, you too are impacted by what happens in the courtroom, even if your loved one is not my client.
Yeah, I'll tell you, as a law professor, I frequently have students, and I think maybe even more so in the last few years, who really are interested in figuring out how they fit into this fight for justice today. And they don't necessarily understand how being a public defender fits into that. I think Tiffany and Zanele, thank you for shining light on that. Now, I'm curious, Sam, Natasha, Sara, any other thoughts on that topic before I move on? Because I think it's such an important topic. I'd love to know if anyone else has thoughts that they feel should be shared.
Yeah, I think that one way, and it's a little bit different, but I think that we can have impact on these things as a public defender in the way that you treat and interact with your client. Because I think that this is also what I found and what I learned and became a better person and lawyer for, is that oftentimes your clients aren't used to being listened to. They don't think they have a voice. They don't, nobody's listened to them before. You're surely not going to listen to them. And when you do, not only does your case get stronger, not only do you get better as a person, but I saw an impact on my clients and their ability to go back out into the community and act like somebody who is being listened to. So that is just, and I think that's one of the things that has just continued to draw me to indigent defense, is that they taught us in kindergarten, the way you treat people matters. And I think it matters in ways that are indirect and that you might not even realize initially when you're doing it.
So my thought is that this criminal justice struggle and what public defenders and criminal defense lawyers do every day, I think, is very tied to civil rights. And so I think the George Floyd case, but also I'd go back a little further to Black Lives Matter. I think that those are significant events, I think, as it relates to both criminal justice and civil rights. And to me, the only comparison, at least for my generation, would be Rodney King. But I think even compared to Rodney King, I think George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, I think, has increased awareness about the police lying, the police abusing people, that I think we're in a place now that I don't think we've ever been in this space before. There's a lot to do, but there's a greater awareness now than ever before, at least in my life.
I guess a lot has been said, and I agree with all of that, but I think if you zoom out, what happens in the criminal legal system is that people look at folks who are charged with crimes as being in a group of other people. And that makes it okay to treat these other people in ways that are not really how you would treat a human. And as a public defender, I find it's often my job to explain how this person is not other. This could be someone that you love. I remember one of the judges that I appear in front of had a clerk who always looked like he was in a bad mood when I would come around. And he was just extremely unfriendly to the defense all the time. And then that young man had a sister who got arrested in the same courthouse that he was working. And it changed everything about his countenance. When people believe that it could happen to someone that they love, they care more about it. If you, and you all are law students, and you will know that the Bill of Rights was written by people who thought that these rights would be what their people needed. They were white men, property owners, and they thought that they needed these rights to protect themselves. And over the years, those rights have been eroded because they are thought to be now just being used by others. And that's why the Fourth Amendment is so weak now. So the more that you can build bridges between marginalized people and people who have more power, it will help as a public defender, and it really in any courtroom.
Yeah, this is such a great conversation. I want to throw out another question, but really, I want y'all to answer whatever you want to answer. But I've got some questions for you. So the next thing I want to ask you is this. You talked about building bridges, Natasha, and I know all of you have thought about this. There are walls that exist between communities that need public defenders and public defenders, even the best public defenders, who are overwhelmed, under-resourced, trying their best, often can't be the lawyers that the people they serve need, and that builds walls and it reinforces stereotypes, and as Director Rossi talked about earlier today, it leads to terms like public pretender. So what is it that we can do as advocates to break down those walls, to build those bridges, to build alliances with the people we serve, whether it's on an individual basis or whether for those who lead offices it's on an organizational basis? What are some thoughts about how we break those walls down and build those alliances that are so important? I want to hear from all of you, but whoever wants to field it first. Any thoughts on that?
I have a short answer. Show up.
Yeah.
Keep showing up. I mean, that's the reality. I mean, we've all heard the saying, right? People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And knowing that you are starting from that position, you started from a position where they won't believe that you want to be there. They don't believe that you have the ability or the capacity or the competency, right, to work for them, to know the law, to advocate for them. Knowing that there are all these societal distrusts that are out there before you walk in the door is you could perceive as a disadvantage or you could perceive it really as a strength. And in a lot of ways, I say you perceive it as a strength because you know that that's the position that you are more likely than not starting from. And so you know the job. And the job is to counter that. The job is to show up, to be consistent, right? To do the things that you promised to do where you can do the things that you promised to do. Listen to them, advocate, involve them in the process. And you just keep doing that. And I mean, that's how you show them that you care about them and their communities. And that's how you really start to kind of reinforce positive thinking about who we are and what we do, but also kind of dispel some of those stereotypes. And the other beauty about doing that, especially when you have clients in custody, is that they talk. They talk. So when you do it for one client and they talk to each other, after the second, third, fourth, 50th, 100th client you get, you now then have made a better environment for yourself, but also for your colleagues, because they know that the people who are going to come are going to keep coming and keep showing up. And so I think that's really how you start to bridge those gaps. You show up, and then the second part is you ask for help. You find yourself a community that will help you sustain, because it is not easy to keep showing up when you know that you're coming with all those challenges. And you won't stay in a practice long if you don't find a community for sustenance. So for the client, you go there, right? For yourself, you find a community and get the support that you need so that you can continue to show up.
And the only thing that I will add is to do that, you have to embrace humility.
Mm-hmm.
I think that far too often we misunderstand our legal education to be intended to sort of bolster our confidence to the point that it becomes arrogance. And when we allow ourselves to not just be confident but to be arrogant, it is actually us who's erecting the wall. We make ourselves inaccessible by presuming certain things about what people can and cannot understand, instead of looking at things as, what am I failing to communicate effectively, right? The answer is sometimes it's us, and sometimes our bad reputations as lawyers, period, and as defenders or defense attorneys is earned, right? It's deserved. And I'm grateful to work with lawyers like those who are up here who have done the opposite of that. But, you know, the dangerous thing about a lack of humility as an aggregate. So if you have an office full of people who are more interested in sort of like the gamesmanship of the courtroom, even just the optics of being a lawyer, there's a lot of branding happening with the profession right now. And, you know, for better or for worse, I mean, some people like it. But when you're in public service, it's a little bit problematic to center your image rather than your offering. Do you understand what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So, you know, when we're thinking about how to break down walls, you must possess the humility to ask yourself whether you are the one erecting the walls. Mm-hmm. And when you have colleagues who are causing harm to their clients because they're not listening to them, because they're not giving them the discovery that they're supposed to have, because they believe that they own the file and not the client. There are all of these things that lawyers normalize that are actually wildly unethical and immoral. Right? When you have colleagues and you see that kind of conduct, then it's your responsibility not to like drag the lawyer down, but to do your best to help that lawyer do things differently, because that is the only way that you're going to mitigate the harm that's being caused to the community. And when you mitigate the harm being caused to the community by members of the profession or actors in the criminal legal system, then that's just a small piece of making the development of relationships of trust more likely.
Yeah, and good transition to the Barrister Society, because I think that what we're trying to do through the Barrister Society is to help develop, nurture, and mentor sort of the next generation of trial lawyer, whether, you know, public defender, criminal defense lawyer. The Barrister Society, it's not for prosecutors, right? It's not for people that represent corporations. It's designed to help young lawyers who have an interest and an orientation towards representing individuals, whether in criminal court or in civil cases. And the participants, the lawyers that volunteer their time, many of them have criminal defense or public defender backgrounds. So part of my contribution to sort of meeting that challenge, because I'm not in the public defender space per se, but I do have relationships with former public defenders and lawyers who do personal injury, who will volunteer their time to sort of connect with students, train and mentor and develop students. And while that's just one piece, I think we have to start by sort of building the bench.
I think I'd like to piggyback a little bit on what I think everybody said. One of the key things, I think a very tangible, practical thing is communicate. Communicate with your client, because as a public defender, I get people who call me now and say, oh, I want to hire you because my public defender, I can't, whatever. I am the same lawyer now that I was when I was a public defender in the Wild West of Douglas County. I might have more years of experience now, but I can tell you I was in the courtroom on a daily basis a lot more back then. The difference is that I have maybe 15 active cases as opposed to 400 when I was a public defender in Douglas County. But what I found, and it was a rough road learned, but sometimes that what we forget, I think sometimes even private attorneys, and it goes back to that human thing, and everybody deserves dignity and be treated well. Communicate with your client. I got to a point where my first meeting with my clients would be, hey, how are you? I'm Sara. I'm your lawyer. Listen, I'm not going to be able to talk to you 5 times every day. I might not even be able to talk to you once every day, but I will not forget about your case. And if I'm not talking to you, it's not because I'm forgotten about your case. I have a lot of cases, but yours will be my priority when it needs to be my priority. So I think that in some ways, John, talking transparently about the reality of what the system puts on public defenders, both when you're a public defender and if you move on to be something other than a public defender, is that we talk about it and engage with your client. I know a lot of private attorneys that get paid a lot of money whose clients have a lot of complaints about how they communicate with them as well. So I think that's another takeaway that I took, that I don't get those complaints because I learned real quick in the public defender's office to do my job well, to be the attorney I wanted to be for these clients. When I had 500 cases, I had to communicate. And you're exhausted, and it's the last thing you want to do at the end of the day if your client's out on bond is to send them a text message. But let me tell you what, 2-second text message, hey, I can't get you an answer right now, but I will, does so much. So that's what I would encourage you to do if you end up in the role.
Tasha, anything you want to add or?
Well, I was thinking while Tiffany was talking, she was talking about humility, and I was thinking about most lawyers got to where they are because of some kind of privilege. And it might be the privilege of having 2 parents who pushed you to succeed, or someone who encouraged you. Well, I was raised on the notion that this country does not offer equal opportunities. And so at any given moment, the smartest person in the room may well be the janitor. And so if you are wanting to make real headroads with your clients, you have to show up, as Zanele says, and show up as a human who's interested in getting to know the person. Everyone that I meet who's a client of mine has something that I can find to really admire about them.
Yeah. I have to say, Sara, when you were talking, it really made me think about sort of just one of the evolutions we went through in Gideon's Promise as we were thinking about, we're constantly changing our curriculum as concerns come up, and we've added a session where we it's woven into the whole curriculum, but there's a session specifically where we think about how do you have conversations with people that we serve when they are facing really difficult situations, and we can't necessarily be the lawyers they need us to be. And can we say, you are facing something that is tragically unfair. And let me tell you what I can do, but also let me tell you my limitations, because we have to figure out how you want me to best serve you. And that transparency, I think, is really critical. We can't, if you have 400 cases, be the lawyer that your client deserves. That is a great point. So I want to ask you all to think about this, not just public defenders, but lawyers committed to doing social justice work in the criminal arena, the civil arena. If you decide you are going to invest your life representing people who have odds stacked against them, that's going to come with incredible challenges. It is going to come with a cost to you. And I wonder if I could ask each of the panelists to think about what you think is one of the greatest challenges that faces a lawyer that really wants to do this work? What is the kind of thing you think a new lawyer is often afraid of? And what thoughts do you have if they came to you and said, this is what is keeping me from doing the work? What would you say to them? So what's the challenge and what would your advice be? And I'm putting you on the spot because that wasn't one of the questions I sent you in advance, but you're all trial lawyers, so.
Yeah, well, let me say this in terms of just civil rights work. It is extremely difficult work. The odds of success are not great. I think the biggest impediment, and we've probably all heard talk about, qualified immunity and federal judges, but I think judges are really the biggest impediment in some ways to getting justice for families or individuals that are victims of police misconduct or police abuse. And I would say probably second to judges would be elected officials. Atlanta, despite its history, is just not a very good place when it comes to victims of civil rights abuse getting justice from the city of Atlanta. And so that is very discouraging. That is very frustrating to be in a city that has what some people might consider progressive leadership, Black leadership. But your chances of getting justice, I think, as a civil rights plaintiff in Atlanta are less than if you were in Minneapolis. So that is, and that's hard to reconcile. I think it's just sort of one fight at a time. It doesn't feel to me like it's getting any better in Atlanta. I do think that post George Floyd, the awareness is greater, but there's nothing that I think I can point to that has happened in the city of Atlanta that I think in any meaningful way post George Floyd. Yeah.
So your advice is one case at a time?
One case at a time, and I guess for me, there's some manner in which I have to be involved in the fight for justice. I did it as a public defender for some years and maybe burned out from that. For me, as hard as it is doing civil rights work, it ain't as hard as being a public defender, right? And it has a financial component to it such that if you succeed, it can be a good living. I think that while there is a shortage of civil rights lawyers, I think the best people to come later on in their career and do civil rights are the people who are public defenders now.
Challenge, as a public defender, you would find that you cannot always win.
What?
Yes. And many of your cases will have heartbreaking endings, and they can haunt you.
Yes.
So you have got to do the best you can, because some of the outcomes will follow you around. And so you have to do the best you can, and you have to also take care of yourself and be kind to yourself.
I
Can I just
100%.
ask really quickly before you go,
of course.
Sarah, how long did it take you to learn that lesson? Take care of yourself. I mean, did you come in knowing that?
No, I did not come in knowing that.
So that's a real gem for you all. Now you can come in knowing that. Sarah.
Yeah, I agree 100% with Natasha. I think one of the hardest things that I see over and over again is that you're going to do, whether you're at the beginning of your career or further on in it, whether you're a public defender or a private criminal defense attorney, you're going to do a lot of what looks like to other people as losing. And I think that probably a lot of us who are lawyers come from a bit of a type A personality, and we're not used to that. We've been achievers and succeeders our whole life. And so I think my advice to get over that hurdle is I had to redefine what winning and losing meant in my career. And whether it's like Natasha said, knowing how to take care of yourself, or sometimes it's like, you know what? My client went to prison for 10 years, but they were looking at 110. So you're going to call that a loss if you want, but we're going to call that a win. Or sometimes, and there are the heartbreaking ones she talks about, where my client's going to prison for life plus 40, and I don't know that I can call that a win, but what I call a win goes back to how I treated him in the process, right? I think, and sometimes your client's going to want to make decisions that you know in your lawyer heart may not lead to the best on paper outcome for them, but sometimes it's a win that you gave that client the support and the power. And I've seen clients go to prison for longer court terms and be better with it than some who get shorter terms and didn't feel like they had control over the process. So redefine all that if you want to be a public defender, I think, and put yourself on that trajectory to kind of hopefully not burn out as quickly or not at all.
Great advice.
Burnout. Oh,
You want to go? So since everyone's giving so I can give this advice from the perspective of being someone in the work who supports the work of public defenders through policy and other things. Because it really isn't, the challenges aren't so different. They maybe come differently. There's a young man named William Marcus Wilson. He defended himself against basically an attempted lynching in Statesboro, Georgia in 2020, shortly after the killing of George Floyd. He fired a warning shot that ended up striking and killing a young woman who was in the car with the people who were trying to run him off of the road. And it was because he was in an interracial relationship. His girlfriend was white, and they mistook them for another interracial couple. Mark turned himself in after learning that the young lady had died. Had never even had a traffic ticket. His father was the police chief in Coweta County. His mother had been a school teacher his entire life. When he turned himself in, his parents really believed that he would be going home once he explained everything that happened. There were witnesses. The kids in the car had all kinds of alcohol and firearms and all this. Long story short, because of our country's history, Mark was charged with murder, felony murder, and a host of other things, and the state was asking for life in prison. We were able to, he had hired one of our colleagues, and one of our coalitions decided to support Mark's case, right? And so for people that did practice criminal defense, it's like there's this tension between remembering that you're not a part of the defense team, but feeling like you're a part of the defense team, and all of the emotional attachment that you have to your clients, especially clients who are being targeted because of race. Mark went to trial. He had the support of community. He went to trial. And at the last minute, the prosecutors asked for an instruction on a manslaughter code section it was a surprise to the defense. But for that, he would be free. But he was convicted on that count of manslaughter, and the judge had the discretion to sentence him to probation, but instead gave Mark the max, which was 10 to start, 10 to the door. He was free. He was incarcerated for over a year and was only free for a few months while he stood trial. And on one hand, we were all relieved that Mark was not going to spend the rest of his life in prison, right? So when Sarah's talking about redefining what constitutes a win, but on the other hand, we were absolutely devastated that this kid was going to be in prison for 10 years, and the sheriff of his home county actually testified for him. He had 23 character witnesses at trial during sentencing, and the judge still maxed him out. So that was the most recent experience of when I remembered what it really felt like. As political losses we lose all the time too, but what it feels like for the loss to be attached to one specific human life, and extrapolating from that, all of the work that we do down at the Capitol on Stand Your Ground and other things is for all of the Mark Wilsons of the world. And so the answer or the solution that I offer to those of you who decide to do systems work is remembering that, although people say it is thankless work, it really isn't. Because Mark, for example, and his family they still organize with us right now. Mark has started coaching the children who are incarcerated in the prison where he's being held, a sports league, because he was a football player. His family only shows us kindness and graciousness and gratefulness, and it makes it easier for us to continue to do this kind of work. Because in Statesboro, Georgia, it's not just like you go down here to CNN Center, y'all decide you want to have a march. There are people with rifles trained on you. We had to have security to just go to lunch during trial. And so without remembering that, in fact, the work isn't thankless, and receiving the kindness that people show to you so that you can then turn that around and extend that kindness to people. Without that, I think that, this is when you say, like, you know what, I'm out. This is not sustainable. It's not like you're gonna be making a lot of money doing this work. So the fulfillment that you get, not because you revel in sort of attention, but because you're reminded of like your deeper, more intrinsic purpose.
I have to answer this. No, I'm just joking. Listen, you find brevity in the moments, but truthfully, a lot of, I guess, what we have now talked about is the challenges and the survival in the work and in the practice. But really, the impact is a personal one. And for me, that's where the biggest challenge was. I mean, I when I started law school, my oldest daughter was 16 months. She was 4 when I graduated. That was when Hurricane Katrina happened. It happened while I was in law school. So 2 years later, I took that kid and moved to New Orleans to a place where nobody wanted us to be, like I told y'all. And the judge's question was, what high school did you go to? Because that's what gave you credibility in front of them. The last thing they were interested in is a group of 10 lawyers who none of whom were from the state coming down to tell them how to serve justice in their community. And that is, but it was getting that question and then being able to go back to my office or go back to someone's house with that pen and have a conversation about the realities of how we were treated. And then also to brainstorm innovative ways we were going to go back in, because we're going back, right? The day after I got sworn to take the bar, sworn into the practice, very next day I had my first motions hearing on the simple possession case. I was mortified. I was literally mortified. You imagine it. Y'all in law school now. But I look back and it was my colleagues, my people in my community, right, who were sitting in the back. And even though it probably wasn't the best hearing I ever had, they were like, got you, dog. And I was like, okay, we can survive it, right? First time I got held in contempt in a courtroom. I'm not promoting that. It just what happened. It happens. And I'm in a tank. And it was on a Friday afternoon. I was concerned, but one of the people in my community just went right up to the defense table, got my keys out my purse, and they went to go pick up the kid, right? So then we worked it all out and I got out. But I had my community. And that is, even here in Fulton County, Sam is one of those. When I lost a case that still wakes me up at night. Tiffany is another. I reached out to my community on the day that the citizen hearing was going to happen. And I said, y'all, this is going to be very, very, very difficult for me. And I knew that I was going in front of a hostile judge. And without me asking, the day of the hearing, I looked back and they were sitting in the gallery. And I was like, okay, that is my community. So, I mean, the reality is the impact of the work is something that stays with you. And the challenges of the work are very, very difficult. But even as I sit here right now, I only transitioned to an organization that really is encouraging people to do the same thing because I can genuinely say I never burned out. I never burned out of being a public defender until the last case, until the last hearing. I never burned out. And that wasn't because I did it alone. Because practically speaking, I had more limitations than most of my colleagues. I was a single parent. I had a child at home, and $38,000 is not a lot to go balling out on, right? I had to lean on my community. I had to lean on my colleagues. We had to share resources, share motions. We had to have conversations about litigation strategies, because if I was sitting in a silo trying to figure it all by myself, I would have burned out. And I would not have been able to be an effective advocate for the clients that were assigned to me, and that would not be fair. So if you're gonna get into the practice, I would say know that the realities of the work are hard, but go find your tribe, go find your community, because they really will help you sustain and continue to show up and help encourage you to do it the best that you can.
And I just have to say, I think it's a really good one in criminal defense. I have not found camaraderie or kind of professional support or shared values anywhere else like I have. Georgia Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, Southern Center, just working with other attorneys. It's there for you.
So I've got to say, as Zanele's talking about being held in contempt, I see Pam Metzger in the back nodding her head. She was fighting the fight in New Orleans from the moment Katrina hit. And I'll say this, I agree with Zanele. No one's advocating that you get held in contempt. New Orleans was the kind of place where you could not be the lawyer your clients deserved, that the rules of professional responsibility required, that the Constitution required, without getting held in contempt. And if your choice is being held in contempt or violating your obligation to your client, the profession, the Constitution, I think we would all say that's an easy choice. So what I want to say is this, we are almost out of time. I'm going to ask if the panelists would think of a 1-minute nugget you would leave while I share one thought, and then just what would you say in parting words to a group of students, not just law students, because I've got Devin up here in the front row, he's at Morris Brown going, yeah, he's coming to John Marshall. What would you say to a group of students who want to do justice work? And as you're thinking about that, I want to share something that I believe to be true. I'd say the people in this world I know that are happiest are lawyers. The people in this world I know who are most miserable are lawyers. And the difference between those two groups is the first group found purpose in their life. They found a way to use these tools you're getting in law school to do something meaningful. So you wake up every day feeling really, really good about who you are and how you contribute to the world. I know 4 of the 5 folks on this panel are parents. I'm a parent. You wake up every day thinking, do I feel good about the world I'm building for my children? Sam wakes up and says, do I feel good about the world I'm building for Rap's children? but that's really important. So whatever you decide to do, use these tools to wake up every day with purpose. That's how I would end Who Wants to Go Next?
Let me say this. I think that there is great power, I think, in being a lawyer. I've never had any, over the 30 years I've practiced law, I have always felt just empowered by having a job that allows me to go to court and speak on behalf of someone else. And just the thought of being paid any amount of money for what you think and what you say, and to be able to do that just on behalf of an individual, that to me is, I think that is transformative to me. Great.
So I often say to my students, embrace the opportunity to reject unearned deference and instead work to earn the respect of the community you're working in. Mm-hmm. When you get your degree, people will believe you even if you're not telling the truth, even if you're wrong, even if you're not disciplined, if you haven't studied. You will walk into certain spaces and you'll have this credibility that you haven't earned. And that goes for a lot of professions. I also tell football players this when they want to learn about criminal justice issues, right? Just because you're rich doesn't mean that you're right. But so embrace the blessing of having this credential, but then you have an opportunity to just endeavor to earn the trust of people who really do want to work with and alongside you. And you will find yourself with relationships, honestly, that will span your lifetime. And I think that is transferable regardless of what area you practice in. It will enrich your life and it'll allow you to sort of like relax because you won't be on this pedestal, right? You'll be shoulder to shoulder with people.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think being a public being a public defender quite literally changed who I was, my existence. I mean, I was someone who, quite frankly, grew up, I wouldn't say I was privileged, but I certainly grew up very sheltered. And I had a very stable home. And when I went into indigent defense work, I really didn't have a lot of ways to relate to my clients from personal experience outside of what you can see, right? And that did require a lot of humility because whether they knew my story or not, they expected me to know theirs and find some places to be able to relate. And I had to understand that so that I could really be the best advocate for them. And so being a public defender has impacted my life in so many ways because it's taught me really to connect with people as people. It's taught me to understand people in all aspects of the community, from the people that are in the most impoverished communities, right? You got to go in somebody's house and not flinch when you see the roach walking on the wall.
That's right.
And then you got to leave there. You got to go to the Capitol and go to the Gold Dome and help people who never, who live in in the $1 million homes make decisions, right, that won't harm those same clients. And so it taught me, or it forced me to actively learn and be engaged with people at all walks of life, at all time, and to never make judgments. But more than anything, I think it taught me to become perpetually hopeful. Because we talk a lot about the ills and the negative things that happen, but y'all, there have been some beautiful moments that have resulted from the work that we do inside of courtrooms. And I think Travis was talking about restorative justice earlier today. If you have never experienced or seen a restorative justice moment or an outcome, a good outcome in a case that we all recognize should happen, I felt that moment, you won't understand why we fight so hard. Because one of my favorite things to do is to see my I call them my fat clients, but my clients who are formerly addicted to some substance. And then you see them in the streets and now they got hips and backsides and smiles and full faces. Be in the gym in downtown and you see somebody like, hey, guess what I'm doing right now? I ended up going to such and such school and I'm doing this and I want you to know that about me. Like beautiful moments where life has had misfortunes and people have, engaged with each other on opposite sides of the same case, but then found something that they could unify around and then go advocate for collectively. I mean, there are just so many moments that result from showing up and representing whole human beings and communities that it's hard not to try and not to fight and not to remain optimistic. And really, I mean, I think it's also making sure that those stories are shared and told in as much as we tell the other stories about the harm that happens in the courtroom, because those are the things that change their lives too. And then they go back to the communities and they have even a bigger impact, and they start community programs or organizations and they pay it forward. And so that's one of the things I would say is we take a lot of hits.
Yeah.
We deal with a lot of hard, but there's a lot of hope in doing this representation well.
All right. Sara, Natasha?
I guess my advice is, sitting where I am now after 32 years of practice and hopefully a couple more decades, it is very satisfying to feel like I have devoted my career to something meaningful. And I'm saying that it's been 32 years, but it doesn't feel like that. It goes by very quickly. And you should find something really meaningful to devote your time to. We spend a lot of time at work, maybe too much time at work, but if it's gonna be that much time at work, make it be worth it. And all of the people that I've met, and I used to be so proud that I could remember each and every one. I'm not quite able to do that anymore, but it's so wonderful to think about all the people whose journeys I've been a part of.
Sara?
I think my advice would be, if you feel drawn to this work, to what we've talked about here today, find a way to do the work. And if that means you find a way to do it with a full-time public defender and engage in it, then that's great. And if that means that you become a private attorney, take an appointed case. Do the work. There are ways to engage in this community no matter where the practicalities of life take you. Be the mom with a baby on your hip, knocking on Georgia Innocence Project's door saying, hey, you got some work? But find a way to do this work, and I think it will take you on the path that fits with your life. It fits what they've said. If you're passionate about it, it's the best work, and just find a way to do it.
Well, I want to say thank you just for taking the time. These are very accomplished lawyers who agreed to come here to wind up our program, giving you some pearls of wisdom. So I want to say thank you to our panelists. Y'all are great. You inspire me. I'm grateful to you. And before Dean Gatewood gives some closing remarks, I do want to let Dean Gatewood know that while you weren't here this morning because you were at a board meeting, I thanked Dean Gatewood because this doesn't happen if you don't have a dean like Dean Gatewood. There are not a lot of deans in this country that would shut the school down for a day, bring in a group of people like the ATJ team, bring in organizations from across the country that want to help students find impactful careers and give our students opportunities to just spend a day networking and learning. And that's because we have a dean, we have a law school that really prioritizes developing practice-ready lawyers who help people. So I just wanted to say thank you, Dean Gatewood. And before Dean Gatewood comes up and closes us out, I am excited to invite Brooke Antonio up to say some final words on behalf of the ATJ team. And again, Director Rossi, Nikhil, Lauren, Brooke, we can't be more grateful to you. This was an amazing day. It means so much to us. Thank you.
Good evening, y'all.
Good evening.
I won't be here long because I know everybody's tired. It's been a long day. As John said, I am Brooke Antonio with the Office of Access to Justice. And, you know, this has been special for me. Coming back to Atlanta, I started my career in 2011 at the Fulton County Public Defender's Office. And so being able to come back here and see some of those people who built me up early in my career. I saw Torres Butterfield earlier, who was my first mentor at the public defender's office. He was in private practice, but he would take the time to sit and strategize and to walk through cases with me. See Zanele up here. She's now the executive director at Gideon's Promise. At the time I came into the PD's office, she was upstairs doing the 7 deadlies, the serious crimes, violent stuff. But she never turned me away and was always a good mentor. I see my old trial partner over there, Megan. And the list could go on, people that I saw that built me up. Nelly kind of stole my thunder earlier, because even if public defender's offices are sometimes underpaid, underfunded, under-resourced, the superpower that we have as public defenders is our community. Mm-hmm. That community is going to build you up and be with you on your highs. Mm-hmm. That community is going to be there to console you in your lows. Every step of the way of this journey, that community has been there to help build me up. I wouldn't be where I am today at the 13-year public defender career without that community building me up. There are giants in this room. You guys have giants as professors in rapping, as Zanele here teaching, and other people they bring in at this school that are here to help you and build you up and build the public defender community. And so I'm grateful to be here to thank all of them for their participation in building me up and building the community up. This event, this tour, has been nothing short of amazing. You know, ATJ spent time traveling across the country, listening to public defenders, impacted communities, and advocates like you. And before I forget, I want to take a little moment to thank Nikhil Ramnani. He has, every step of the way, planned the entire law school tour.
Yes.
We joked with him the other day and said, hey man, you need to put event planner on your resume. He has been the backbone behind the scenes, making sure the trains run smoothly. From New Hampshire, to Montana, to Maine, to Texas, Washington, and now to here, culminating event here in Atlanta. And this event has been great. You guys have sat and you've learned from each other. There's been recruiting. And you've made connections, all to further the community. So, thank you, Dean Gatewood. Thank you, Dean Harrison. Thank you, Professor Rapp, Atlanta John Marshall Law School. Thank you for being such gracious hosts, for your hospitality, and for building up the community. And law students who attended, thank you. You are now a part of the community, and your voices will be necessary moving forward. Although this is the last stop on the tour, the work doesn't stop. At Access to Justice, we will continue working and supporting public defenders and thought leaders in this space, and advance access to justice for all of your clients. So keep persevering, keep fighting, and keep coming to Access to Justice to make sure that we ensure that the Department of Justice can fulfill its mission of justice for all. Thank you. Nikhil is gonna kill me, but I wanna do this. It's his birthday today. Can we sing him happy birthday?
Let's do it.
Yes.
Nikhil.
Happy birthday to you. Stand up. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Nikhil. Happy birthday to you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to keep this brief because I know everyone is tired. It's been a long day, but it's been a very rewarding day.
Yes.
And I must admit that Professor Rappin is giving me too much credit. This was really his brainchild that he came to me and asked, would I be willing to do this? And it was easy for me because all I had to do was say yes. And that's what I did. I would sit on weekly conference calls and just listen. Yes, that's all I had to say. Can we do this? Yes. Can we do this? Yes. And so it was really Professor Rappin's leadership that made this come to fruition. And I must say, I have an excellent team. I have Dean Harrison, Director LaRon Bird, I got Abbott Zenadine. All of them spent countless hours arranging this event for you today. And so I owe them much gratitude. So it's not me, I don't take credit for this. I give you guys all the credit. And I hope everyone learns something from today, especially you law students here, because this event was really for you. This event was with you 100% in mind. And I'm happy that we were able to do it on a floor that was produced with you 100% in mind. So as we break from today, I want to thank the Access to Justice team, Nikhil Ramani. He was very instrumental on those. He set up all the Zoom calls. Brooke Antonio, Lauren Lambert, Emmy Lopez, and I especially want to thank Director Rossi for coming here and choosing Atlanta's John Marshall Law School as the final stop on your national tour. This was really an honor for us, so thank you very much.
Yes.